Right, thinking about ideas. I have a moment in time not to listen to anyone or attend to anything other than my own mind. And so, in a sense, I'm given the request. There is what comes into mind is the question, what to do now? What to do now? And in every now of my experience, there's always a motivation within the now. It's always existing. And that motivation is always related to, in some way, constructing, producing, building, creating, essentially, would be the umbrella term. Motivation to create in the time that I have available of conscious experiencing. My dreams, my pleasures. I'm always doing this, and at the same time I'm always trying to minimise my experience of unpleasant things, which can take many forms, such as a sense of avoiding loss of what's important to me, and security issues overall. So the aim is in some way to, at that level, to cushion myself from any blows that life, my day-to-day experiencing, brings. For the most part, it's about doing all that I can to make sure that my ride is maximally pleasant to me. So in regard to action, in regard to working towards ensuring that life is maximally pleasurable, there is deferred gratification that can go on, and there can be various degrees of readiness and intensity to defer gratification. But for the most part, it's a kind of pushing forward to repeating and amplifying and maximising the pleasurable experiences I've had and their stimulus associations. As for example, if I feel erotic sexual feelings related to eros, I will notice the stimulus associations with that feeling and seek the stimulus associations in order to bring about a return of the feeling. So, for the most part, my mind is engaged with the ideas relating to the stimulus objects and stimulus associations with a view to of acting in a manner that's most likely to bring about what one wants. Noticing passing that what one wants may be different from what one needs, and that sometimes one might be prepared to ignore one's needs in order to get what one wants. And so the idea is that ideas are tools for the mind's pleasure projects. And ideas that come into close proximity, like a tear of water going down a window pane, collecting other water, develops momentum. And momentum is a readiness of intensity of, like a moving object, not being resisted easily, like a bullet, an attitude, an intensity of attitude, which is to say continue along the same line unless impacted, encountering a different force. So beliefs with force can be seen in some way as intentional attitude. and determination to overcome resistance to the movement of travel, the direction of movement of travel. Think dogmatic, religious, fanatical at the extreme. Think grabbing, think addictive. For the most part, these energies of intensity, of holding on, grasping, create tension, both for the possessor or the possessed by entity, as well as waves around the entity which are given out and encountered by other entities. Consider them as gravitational waves of repulsion, which is to say, pushing away the other energies of other entities that in some way resist one's path towards one's desired stimulus object. Now, the idea is that the idea is a tool that's been chosen by the entity to allow its, or to facilitate its movement towards its desired object. And that certain ideas related to a certain aim may come together and mix and match and form an alliance such that the entity marshals these ideas in the furtherance of its project. So, ideas are tools for the entity's projects, and the entity's projects are its projects of interest, but rather more addiction to stimulus objects as the means for pleasure. This is, in a sense, the giving of power, energy, over to an externalized world and being in service of that externalized world, rather than the externalized world being in service of the entity. Which is to say, the idea of grabbing the externalized world in order to force the externalized world into service of one's aims and desires, rather than recognizing that the externalized world is already in service, and that what is rather more necessary is to remove the block. The idea that the world is separate and needs to be manipulated, coerced and controlled in order to become that which brings pleasure. In essence, the idea that pleasure comes from stimulus objects. This needs to be questioned in view of the fact that the mind can experience pleasure even in the presence of physical pain, so that this awareness allows a reconsideration of the fixed idea that pleasure can only come from the external world, in quotes. So, what are ideas and what are our relations to them? Now, if we accept that ideas, as I have said, are tools to the accomplishment of our pleasures and the avoidance of our pains, tools in the service of our fulfillment, then what does this mean? Our pleasure projects, and necessarily we have to conclude, as of a truth, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that we are not our ideas. I am not my ideas. My ideas are not me if they are tools. Therefore, in regard to mind dynamics and the truth of our minds, we are not our ideas. we are the receiver of ideas and the decision makers as to which ideas we choose to be in our service. And the courses, that they seemingly compel us, if we adopt them as our own, to take. So if we're not our ideas, who are we? As we've just seen, we are the choosers, the decision makers, as regards what is accepted as truth or real, or more specifically, in the case of our pleasure projects, most valuable. And ideas that are taken on as beliefs, which is to say they become, in a sense, assimilated, fixated, laid down almost like a channel, influence or determine action. For beliefs are like spectacles put on, influencing perception. And perception determines action. Such that if an object or entity is perceived to be a block to one's needs, wants, desires, then it is perceived to be an enemy, and this perception is more important to the mind than the actuality, because the perception influenced by beliefs is taken to be the most valid truth for the experiencing entity as to reality. In a sense, what one believes is a theory about truth taken to be the truth itself, specifically and particularly in regard to necessary actions to be taken. Thus, for example, if a person perceives another person or entity to be an enemy, even if in actuality that person or entity is a friend, what will count for the enactor, the acting person, is their perception. And thus, the perception of an enemy will generate fearful energy vibrations of defense or even attack. And because of the existence and the experiences of these negative vibrations of energy, then the situation will be defined by the enactor as one in which, when they remember it, it was an encounter with an undesirable other. And it is this that will be laid down in memory, so that the person, even if they were a friend or perceived to be an enemy, then the memory of the encounter with that person would be a memory, an unpleasant memory of an association with that person or entity. One might summarize it in the statement, as one perceives, so one believes, and so one acts. So what this brings us to, these considerations of ideas, beliefs and actions, perceptions, is the importance, and therefore the underscoring, of ideas and how they are formed, and most particularly how they are, the process by which they are selected and rejected as practical truths for three-dimensional world navigation. A fuller explanation of the role of ideas as a central feature of the anatomy of mind can be found in the communication called The Story of Us, and contained within that The Story of You, which are themselves stories contained within the book Deucalion Moon.